Right then. So, part 4. A mobile application that's filled with static HTML isn't much good for us, is it? What we really need to do is be able to download some data from somewhere, be that an Oracle database or some other web service. Applications built with tools like PhoneGap tend to be what we might call loosely coupled. If you think about the route in Apex between the database and the mobile application, it's incredibly quick to develop those applications. But one of the reasons is that all the hops over system boundaries, so from the database to some web server component to the application, tend to be provided for you. So that link, that connectivity is done for you, which saves you a lot of time. But if you want to get in there and do something subtly different, it might be harder to do. Whereas with tools like PhoneGap, you tend to be responsible for every place data has to transition across a system boundary, which means you have to put more time and effort in, but you get more flexibility. What we're going to do here is we're going to pretend that we're separating out our concerns. We're going to separate out the server part of this from our mobile application, and we're going to mock or stub out the data provider part of this application. If I very quickly go to this website here, which is off on a tangent, but it's worth visiting for a second. This is a site that lets us search courses available in UK HE institutions, and I'm going to search for mobile. What we've got is a web interface, HTML here. Quite common to be able to want to present this sort of stuff in mobile applications as well, as you can imagine. So what I can do is I can say format equals JSON, and what I get back instead of a HTML site is just the raw data that's been presented on that page, and this is very amenable to a display in a mobile application. If I go back here, you can see that it's quite a sophisticated API, and you can put in postcodes, latitude, longitudes. The API will give you distances from a point if you do a spatial search, but ultimately what gets returned is just JSON data, and whilst this happens to be dynamically generated, it could just as easily be a flat file which has been read off disk. So what we can do is we could actually mock up our data. Now if we think about the data that's in the Oracle database, what I've done is I've taken that data and I've transformed it into some JSON, and we could pretend that this output here has not been generated from a flat file, but it's been generated by some back-end web service. If you were developing an application and you'd separated out the roles of server developer and client developer, what might be quite useful is for the mobile developer to sit with the server developer and say, well, obviously we've not built the back end yet, but we can agree a data format between ourselves that I will agree the server should provide and you will consume. So I've essentially invented an interface between our server component and our client component here, and then just saved it as a file which can be accessed on disk. So you can see here's all the data from the database, surname, forename, grade and specialisms. So this is like we're designing a protocol in a very dynamic, agile sort of a way. And if we wanted to add more data to it, we could do it. Or if we decided this is currently a JSON array, but actually it probably makes more sense for it to be a JSON map keyed by ID. These are design decisions that you can come to and you can experiment with as you work in quite an agile way, see which data structures work best for you. So what we're going to do is, here's the file where that data is available, and we're going to pretend that's not just a flat file, but it's a response to a web service call. If we look at our application, here's the app as we left it last time. We had a header and a menu header, and then we had a list with 3 items in it. We don't really want 3 static items. We'd like the items that are going to populate this list to be pulled from some back-end web service. If we look at our code, the first thing we need to do then is we have our unordered list here with our hard-coded list items. We just want to get rid of those. They're no good. We want to dynamically fill this list out. In order to do that, what I want to do is to be able to very easily and quickly locate this unordered list item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an ID tag to this element, and I'm going to say ID is nurse list. A quick note, if you're cutting and pasting between this PDF document or this docx document and the code, make sure that when you paste it, the double quotes you get are standard ASCII double quotes and not the Windows code page double quotes, which you sometimes get from a docx file. Although it won't matter in the HTML, it will matter in the JavaScript later on, so just be careful that these quotes are the right ones. So all I've done is remove the hard-coded data from this unordered list and said, by the way, this has an ID of nurse list. I'll refresh this. There we go. The data's gone from our list. So that's the first part of this operation. Now we actually need to go and fetch this data, which means we're going to need to write some code. As well as the HTML part, you can see we've got some code here. We download some scripts and then we call app.initialize. In order to keep this file clean, I'm going to try and put all my code for fetching this list into a JavaScript file on its own. So all I'm going to do here is to say app.updateNurseList. And it's a function without any parameters. So we're going to initialize the app and then we want to update the data in this list. These functions are declared in this JavaScript file. So it's JS index.js, which I've already got open here. And you can see it declares a JavaScript object, which declares a member called initialize that happens to be a function. That function calls bind events. Bind events declares a document listener, which causes on device ready, blah. We can just add things to this object if we like. So in particular, we'll say comma, and then update nurse list is a function which takes no parameters. Just make sure that that tallies. Update nurse list, update nurse list, and what I'll do is I'll say alert update nurse list. Okay, so all I've done is after initialization I'm going to call this function, and I've declared this function. Remember, because this is an object, there has to be commas between the members of that object. So received event curly brace, I've added a comma, and then this new function declaration update nurse list. I'm going to save that, go back to my browser window. Okay, and we get this alert immediately, update nurse list, and then we get a second reporting of update nurse list. This particular tool, Ripple, is calling the document ready twice. Don't worry about it, it won't affect your application, but that's why you're getting two alerts. We're going to take these alerts out eventually, but I just put it in there because I wanted to demonstrate that the function was really being called. So this doesn't actually do anything at the moment. What we're going to do is we're going to take this particular function declaration, and I'm going to make sure that the quotes are right in there. This is the same JSON file but just served up by a different server. You might have to play around with the various options until you get the data from a particular stable place. What we've got now is update nurse list calls this function called getJSON with a URL of data. So whilst this is a URL to a flat file, it could equally be a web service call dynamically constructing this JSON response. Once it's fetched that data, it's going to call a function with the parameter data, and that's actually the data it's parsed from this URL, and we're going to alert got data. So we should see something a little bit different this time. Let's do a reload. And I expected to see got data, but I didn't. Why is that? It's because the double quote marks have messed up. There you go. Let's reload that. Okay, so it comes back now and says got data, which is exactly what we want. Obviously it's not terribly useful at the moment. What we'd like to do then is we'd like to process that data, and what we're going to do is I've given you a full implementation of the function, but I'd like to talk you through the parts of it just now. Let's get rid of the alert. What's going to happen is when this function gets called, the framework is going to go away and fetch this JSON file, which looks exactly like this. and it's an array consisting of objects. We've put a for loop in here that says for each entry in data, so for each element in this array, loop through the object. And then what I'm going to do is for each element in the array, so each one of these things here, I'm going to get hold of my nurse list in the HTML, paste that in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to append some HTML, and what I'm appending is a list item which is a href that has a h3 element that's the forename, comma, the surname, and then has a paragraph text that says grade and inserts the grade text. I'm going to do that for each item in the list, so I'm adding to this unordered list an entry for each nurse in the JSON output. Once I've gone through that for loop, I need to ask the framework to refresh the list for me, because that will reapply the stylings that PhoneGap is using. So I save that. So here we are. When the app starts up, it initializes and then it calls update nurse list. Update nurse list goes and fetches the JSON data, and then for each object in that array we'll add a line to the unordered list like this. So we give that a quick save, go back to our app, reload it, and what we can see now is instantly the data's been fetched and we have an unordered list consisting of all the nurses in that list, and you can see their surname, comma, forename, grade 1. Now you can see that the pointer's changing. I can click on them and nothing actually happens. The reason for that is we've got an anchor tag here, href is hash, and hash is the current page, so whenever you click on these you basically get just redirected back to the same page. Now at this stage you can go in, and I suggest what you do is, this is generating HTML in a slightly different way, obviously. Previously we had list items in the HTML and it was very simple to edit. Here we're dynamically constructing the HTML element and adding it to the list. So this is a slightly more complicated way of constructing HTML. So I suggest for this part of the tutorial you go in, rearrange this so that maybe it says surname space forename, add some graphics to this page, add some boilerplate text, whatever you like. You need to just be comfortable with dynamically adding HTML in this way. And this is very much about HTML development in some ways rather than mobile development, but the point of tools like PhoneGap are that there are many HTML developers around and far fewer native application developers. So if we can enable HTML developers to build web apps, then we've got a win, really. So you can see that's how we're going to load our JSON data, and you can see it working in the application. So this is now no longer hard-coded data, but data that's been fetched from the internet. That's the end of this particular part 4. The last part, we're going to look at how we click on one of these to give ourselves a page that might have the details for Julie, for example. Okay, so you have a play with that, and then move on to part 5 when you're ready.